Let's talk about Skip. This came out early in the morning. I guess no one noticed it until midway through the game, and that is when MLB Trade Rumors posted it that Bob Nightingale mentioned that the Miami Marlins have basically declined Skip Schumacher's 2025 club option. He originally signed a 2-year deal with a club option and going into that third, not something you usually see. And we would have to look back to see which managers have had that contract before, but Skip was the 2023 National League Manager of the Year, hasn't done that since Joe Girardi in 2006. He took him to the playoffs in a full season for the first time since 2003. He joined Jack McKeon and Jim Leyland as as the third manager in Marlins history to lead the team to a record over 500 in their first year managing the team. Couldn't have asked for anything better from Skip. All that you hear from the players is really just very good stuff from Skip. He's great with the media. He's been great for the most part through his Marlins tenure, despite now, tough 0-9 start. You can't blame him for all of it. Eli, I'm going to you here. Your thoughts on hearing this? We obviously knew there was a chance this could happen when Bendick stepped in. This wasn't his guy. You saw a lot of personnel change. And right there and then you kind of ask yourself, what's kind of going on here with Skip? What does this future look like? And the surprising thing is this was done since the winter. So it really does stand out, as something that this has been something done for a while now.
Right. The language is very important here. They did not decline his club option. They seem to have agreed to void his club option. They had that 2025 option that we were aware that there was an option. I think there was a little confusion publicly as to whether it was a mutual option or whether it was a club option. As it turns out, it was in the club's control, but this would sound like, based on conversations between Skip and Bendix, that it led them to this decision where the club voided it, kind of like with an understanding from him that it was the right thing to do. The context for just anybody that's unfamiliar, Skip was hired by Kim Ng, and Kim was one of the most vocal people in the organization about his hire. It was not like a unanimous decision to hire him. It was very much Kim's decision based on the candidates that were out there. It was not like an obvious move at the time. It paid immediate dividends, and even this year, like there are everybody listening to this is kind of familiar already with what Skip brings to the table. Despite being a relatively inexperienced manager, he hadn't been and had any of that experience prior to getting this job right here. They put themselves in this weird position where it was, as you mentioned, an unusually short contract for a manager. It is highly unusual for almost any of them to sign it for any less than 3 guaranteed years, unless it's a kind of unique situation, unless it's maybe an older guy at the end of his career. So I guess that's the only thing, looking back at the previous front office administration, why they were in this awkward spot in the first place, is because he was entering the final guaranteed year of his deal. And I've seen a lot of anger out there initially to this news. And I mean, personally, like, I can't get to that point just because I thought this was just kind of obvious from several months away, because this is how it works usually when the front office changes, with very few exceptions. Like, a new front office leadership doesn't retain the manager that they inherited. This is very much an arranged marriage between the two. They put out, and you referenced this in your article on our site, the public comments that Bendix and Skip put out within the first few weeks of his hiring. The winter meetings came right after that, and Bendix made a point of flying out to California to meet with Skip very soon after taking the job, getting on to good terms. So they've said the right things in public. I mean, trying to make it look like this is a good fit, but it's incredibly awkward that coming off a year where the organization had a lot of success, that the person that put Skip in this position in the first place is no longer there. Incredibly, incredibly awkward, despite that success. That made it seem like it was very unlikely that they would continue in this way, kind of regardless of what Skip's measurables are as a manager. That the front office they're his boss. He has to report to Bendix, and somebody like Bendix, who is hoping to hold this position for the long term, would at least want to survey other candidates and to find his guy for that particular job. So yeah, and now that it's reached the public, And that the timing is not coincidental. Craig kind of hinted at it in his tweet that I don't know how long Bob Nightingale is hanging on to this information, but it's not a coincidence that he put it out when the team was the laughingstock of baseball at 0-9, when something like this would get as much attention as possible. So yeah, I don't know when he found out about it. The fact that they decided on this winter and that they made this decision almost at the same time as when publicly they were talking about how much they were vibing with each other and on the same page. That just goes to show you that you just cannot put much stock in these public statements that these people make about, especially topics as sensitive as contracts and whatnot. I'll just say that before handing over to everybody else, like there's still 152 games to go. And I guess it's still possible that they can negotiate like some sort of extension. But it's it is just extraordinarily awkward. You just look at other examples around the league, and it's unusual for something like for a manager to be in this position when all they've had is, at least the previous year, all they had was success in this job. Why an organization wouldn't want continuity there? But it's just such a unique situation because the team made the decision it did with Kim Ng.
Sorry, Kev. Eli, you kind of touched on this. So just to clarify, like, only because I've seen this sentiment on Twitter a few times today, this doesn't mean that Skip is gone flatly after the season's over. This just opens the door for a possible renegotiation, which could go either way. I mean, I don't expect him to be back, but this doesn't mean that the contract won't be renegotiated at some point throughout the season.
Well, I mean, the issue that for whatever reason arriving to this solution, it comes in the aftermath of Craig Counsell resetting the managerial pay market. Counsell, for anybody that's not aware, he wrote out his entire contract with the Brewers. Then he kind of kept them in. There was like a bidding war for Craig Counsell at the start of last offseason, and the Cubs ended up signing him for 5 years and $40 million, which in terms of guaranteed money and in terms of managerial salary was the highest that a manager had in quite some time. I don't suspect the Marlins are going to be a team that pays top dollar for a manager, especially if the team is not like on the precipice of competing. I think ultimately the biggest concern that people should rightfully have is what this means about the team's competitive chances. For them to reach this decision to void the deal, I think just reading between the lines, you'd fear, understandably so, that this is about the team recognizing that they may be going, if not a full rebuild, then a step back from where they were in 2023, and that Skip is like getting the freedom to explore other opportunities instead of sitting out that rebuild, especially when the team itself might not be interested in paying what it's going to cost for a Manager of the Year award winner.
Yeah, and then the one thing I think is worth noting is I'm not sure if this was done before or after, but Gabe Kapler is in this organization, and obviously we're not going to start talking about potential candidates, but that's the only one I want to mention on here is he's in this organization. He's been around this team for, throughout spring training. He was around them pretty closely. He was there every single day. He's at every single game. We all see him for the ones that are covering. He's there. I mean, it's not like he's an assistant GM and he's not going to show up to every now. He's there. So, obviously I'm not going to say that's his replacement, but it's definitely a name now to keep an eye out on once the season comes to an end or we're getting close to the end of the season where, we start getting more clarity on what the situation looks like. But, as much as I want to hold hope and say there's a chance Skip does eventually come back and there's some sort of contract extension, I guess in this case, I mean, the fact that they were so clear to do this during the winter and not, towards the end of the season, towards the middle of the season, or before whatever deadline they needed to hit, that early on, it shows kind of, and I think what Eli mentioned is they're pretty thick, they're pretty convinced on what they want to do with this team, and Peter Bendix wants to bring in his own guy.
And yeah, I mean, there's so many other angles of this for Skip where you'd expect him to be really desirable if he does get out on the market. I just think he doesn't have as long a track record on the job as Craig Counsell did when he hit free agency last year, but he's somebody that is just a very versatile guy. He oozes leadership ability, but he's also a really adaptable person as well. And he's someone that, as young as he is and as energetic as he is, you could see him doing a job like this for a long time as well, with wherever he potentially goes after that. Yeah, there's not a whole lot of precedent for it. It just took this kind of unique combination of circumstances.